They bought it from us basically with an easement. If you look to the far right of the Matagorda Bay area, you'll see that orange right there still in the landmass. That's Mad Island, and that was referenced earlier as far as bird species, high diversity of bird species, but there's 14,000 acres there. 7,000 acres is what the Nature Conservancy actually owns as a preserve, and they help preserve another 7,000 acres for the TPWD wildlife management area there at Mad Island. There's a few others there exhibited around. There's another group that's working in this area called EcoVest, and we actually partner with them a little bit on some of their management. So TPWD's worked on the Powderhorn and in the Delta. The Weller Flats Conservation TNC's worked quite a bit. There's a lot of conservation there done by the NRCS through WRP. And then also there's some flood mitigation along some of the rivers with the GVRA and of course Calhoun County with Green Lake. Next slide, please. Something that the Nature Conservancy's done in the past is work with water quality and habitat in the bay, and they identified oyster reefs as a dire habitat that was being run down quite a bit. And so we ended up building a few oyster reefs, nothing really local to Calhoun County, but in Matagorda Bay and then also in Pocono Bay. We do quite a bit of uplands work. That's what I do mostly. Land management, working with landowners to manage the properties a little bit better, keep a little bit more vegetation, native vegetation on site. And then we also have done quite a bit of shoreline protection. Some of that has been on most of the areas that we own or that we have easement on. Next slide, please. The oyster reef restoration, again, occurred, if you look at that middle blue box, that's the piece there in Matagorda Bay. And that was developed under a grant, a big grant, and they were trying to reestablish Half Moon Reef, parts of Half Moon Reef there. And the problem with that reef was that the hurricane, I believe in the 60s, had a big impact on that reef, and then overuse. If you look there in Pocono Bay in the bottom left-hand corner with the yellow box, that's we developed 2 reefs there in Pocono Bay, and I think we've got permitting for another. And what we're looking to do is to try to reestablish these reefs to give a lot of these reefs get utilized with a boat and a dredge, and they get flattened. Well, there's a lot of benefit to having a north to south stratification within the water and provide a lot of habitat and different diversity. We've also done some up in Galveston Bay. Next slide, please. The wildlife habitat degradation, a lot, again, that's what I work on with landowners. There is some overuse. Obviously, it's not easy owning land, paying taxes, and then having to deal with droughts. And so the landowners have to end up paying, their note every year, but it doesn't always rain every year. So we try to work with the landowners and decrease the amount of overuse through prescribed grazing. We try to address the aspect of increased brush. Something that we have a lot here on the peninsula and in Calhoun County is McCartney Rose, and then you'll have some live oak, which are, the McCartney Rose is an invasive species. We've got a lot of herbaceous invasive species that we're really trying to address different management schemes for that. Next slide, please. So some of our habitat management is prescribed grazing. Generally, we are advocates of rotational grazing, incorporating rest on the landscape from the cows, and in order to promote higher successional grass species and more volume on the landscape. We do advocate or judiciously use chemical treatment of invasive species, brush species, and herbaceous species. My all-time favorite is the application of prescribed fire, which is a natural application disturbance on the landscape that promotes grasslands. And then we're working for flood mitigation. Actually, what we're trying to do is protect lands and manage the lands to maybe slow the water down as things get flooded. Next slide, please. All this leads to, with the habitat degradation and increase in people and the decrease in the habitat, leads to this area being a kind of a bottleneck of endangered species. And there's going to be more and more species come up on that list. For instance, obviously turtles, but the Alpine mottled falcon, the Atwater prairie chicken, and the whooping crane. And so we're really involved in some of that habitat management. There's local species and work to be done with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then also with PPW. And then of course water quality is necessary, and that was alluded to by Mr. Balboa's presentation, the water quality for endangered species. Next slide, please. So more work to be done. PNC is looking at working with different groups on blue carbon capture, and a lot of that is just reestablishing some of the upland and freshwater flows to encourage native vegetation within the water, on the water's edge. We also want to work with people as far as sea level rise to determine whether or not a lot of our land protection, especially along the coast, as the sea level rises, is going to change. And so if we have that protected already, it's going to have minimal impact to people and allow that natural change to occur on the landscape. We are promoting upland carbon capture through our management schemes, what we're producing, and then of course biodiversity. Next slide, please. So this is a slide I got from Dr. Roel Lopez with the INIR, the Institute for Renewable Natural Resources. Of course, this is a West Texas county, but I think it shows really a lot what we need to start thinking about on natural landscapes. That there's so many social benefits to keeping things natural. And part of it's a wildlife habitat, obviously recreation. Carbon is coming along. We all have to deal with air pollution, flooding, erosion. The working lands includes us keeping, the farmers in business, because when the farmers get run out of business, then they go to the grasslands. And so it just starts disappearing and disappearing and disappearing, and really it gets fragmented and it's not beneficial. It's beneficial to society as far as the best use of the land does not always need to be the highest paid use of the land. And so TNC, with the Sustainable Working Lands, is looking to stack and identify and stack these resources that are available to society and give it some kind of, quantify it some kind of way economically, so that the landowner has an excuse to keep that land in his family or keep it maintained and in a way that would benefit society in a natural way. Next slide. So some of our partners, we work a lot with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, San Antonio Bay Partnership, the GBRE Trust, landowners, obviously, PPWD, the International Crane Foundation, GLO, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and me with the fire. I've worked quite a bit with the Calhoun County government and the residents, the local government. So that's the end of my talk. I hope I didn't run too long. And,
no, thank you. Kirk. One question. The term carbon capture is something that's going to become part of our vernacular over the next 100 years. You mentioned blue carbon capture. How do you define that?
Blue carbon capture. I think there's probably other people that are well suited to define that better than me. But it is utilizing the areas of water, whether it's riparian areas or the bays, and then even the Gulf, and promoting the management that would encourage carbon capture within that water. So it's the vegetation, the animal life, and everything else within that water. So blue carbon has to deal with the area, the water, making the attributes of the water be able to capture that carbon more efficiently.
And the second question is, when you show up and the landowner want to talk to him about, does he pull the shotgun out on you, or do you have a good relationship?
Well, I come from a private lands background anyway, and so usually what I try to do is find out what the landowner likes, and then I talk about that, or I try to help them manage that. So fire, a lot of prescribed fire, prescribed grazing. Fortunately, I deal with a lot of public monies that go out to the landowners through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, through TDWD, things like the Landowner Incentive Program, things like the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program. There's a lot of government monies that are encouraging these landowners to manage better, and also to try to help them do it better and more economic, more environmental. So a lot of times these programs are set up to get them over the hump. Say for instance, if we're promoting prescribed grazing, there's monies in there. A lot of times, most times it's cost share, 50 to 75%, to implement infrastructure like fence and water, and allow those landowners to be able to rotate the cattle around on their property. So the important thing about rotation is that you rest the grasses, you rest the meadow grasses. So the landscape, the habitat, for grazers is just like a buffet. And when you go to the buffet, if there's steak and shrimp there, you're going to eat that until it's all gone. If there's liver and onions there, most people are probably, that'll be your second or third choice. And it's the same thing with cattle. As long as those better species are there, then they're going to hammer those better species until they're gone. And then they'll go to the secondary and then third level species. So it's very important to recognize that and allow the landowners to comprehend that, work with them on that. It actually produces a lot more and better food for them if they'll change up some of their management practices.
Then you must interface with the Texas Extension.
I do quite a bit with Extension, yes, sir. Yep. We try to all work together. We're all on hopefully be on the same page, and we have a lot of partners here. So we're excited about working in Calhoun County and helping landowners.
We're not on the same page, same planet too. Yes, so thank you, Mr. Kirk Feuerbacher.
One second, Kirk.
Question.
You had mentioned about prescribed burning in Calhoun County.
Mm-hmm.
So you are prescribed burn. I mean, how does a person do that?
So
is there agents out there that are doing that in the county, or is it just a farmer burning his property?
a little bit of both. It's all people trying to get it done as best they can. There's obviously some serious laws, and there's also some serious liability involved because it's inherently dangerous. Fire is inherently dangerous. The Coastal Maine Prescribed Burn Association is a nonprofit located in Victoria. I'm the secretary of it, and we facilitate prescribed fire through education and then through planning, getting with the landowner, mapping out what they want to burn, making the right prescription for it, wind direction, wind type, time of year, making sure that the smoke isn't impacting people, and then actual implementation through equipment and support on the day of. So a lot of landowners use me to watch the weather. Hey, is this going to be a good day? Is this not going to be a good day? Can you bring some equipment? Do you have any other landowners that would help me? So there's a lot of that going on. Used to TNC operates under a different set of guidelines. It's called the National Wildland Coordinating Group Guidelines for application of fire, and it's a nationwide application. And what that does, it allows the Nature Conservancy through education and training and equipment to mitigate the risk. So it's very important for the Nature Conservancy only to burn under those guidelines. Now, the state has other guidelines, and it's not that they're less, it's just less intense. And then the landowners all landowners have the right to burn their property. And so, now granted that's subject to county laws, the burn ban, and however the county can offset that by allowing some permits on the side for people that do it right.
Tell us about the organization in Victoria. They can call you.
So the Coastal Maine Prescribed Burn Association, you can call my number, you can look it up. I'm part of the Coastal Maine Prescribed Burn Association. I'll come out and help you map it out, plan it, implement it, things like that. Obviously, the Nature Conservancy and then also the Coastal Maine Prescribed Burn Association, we have to prioritize a little bit more on what we try to help people with. We do have priorities, obviously, closer, whether it's close to some of the properties that we already are protecting or that we're already working with, or whether or not the landowner actually wants to have a change in their management. Because prescribed fire really is the end result. In order to have prescribed fire, you have to have fuel. And if you don't have fuel, which is, grass for most people that have cattle. So fire is a consumption, just like herbivory is a consumption. So when you do put the fire on the ground, you've consumed those grasses for 3 to 6 months. And you can't have cattle back on there for 3 to 6 months. So you have to figure that into your management scheme. However, fire is so beneficial in putting nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium back in the soil. It's also puts everything back on the same level, so all the grasses come back at an equal level and are consumed at the same rate, instead of just your really good grasses getting consumed, and then the last ones that consumed are the worst ones. It takes the brush down. The brush, how many of y'all have mowed any brush species? Anybody ever mow any brush species? What does it do? It thinks it's getting eaten. So what happens is it puts on a lot of stems and a lot of thorns, and it actually puts out a lot of chemicals to make itself less palatable. And so what will happen is that when you burn it, those brush species don't respond the same, and they're actually really, really good food for your wildlife. So, but yeah, you call me and see if I can, we'll see if I can help. I like to work with the volunteer fire departments and everything else, try to actually, prescribed fire could be used as a safety protocol by reducing the fuel load, across the landscape.
There's a question right over.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment to everyone, I run a nonprofit too, and it's not always easy, but this is a very good example of the role of nonprofit organizations in the process of best management practices. You could provide so many services for so many private landowners, especially now that we're in the drought, they're all, the trash is piled up, they're ready to burn. So you're going to have this huge spike in air pollution over the next, whenever the ban is lifted. Who's ready for that? So the role of nonprofits recognizing problems to try to fit in between government or regulatory and property owners. And so hopefully the next time there's a new nonprofit in this area, it will be what to do with shredded tire material.
Thank you all very much.
Also, just the last question. The prescribed burns are important to get rid of the invasive grasses as well, right?
It just depends.
Oh, okay.
So, it actually can exacerbate the problem. If you have the cattle on there, you don't take them off, you don't let the natives compete with it, it can be a problem. So it's all, again, we go at it systematically, and there's limitations to everything, but probably, the reality of it is that most landowners, and we got to recognize this, that most landowners, have to justify their ownership economically. That's probably, 75% of why they own that land. Whether they inherited it or they bought it or whatever, they got to turn a profit. They can't be in the hole every year. And so really what we need to do is we need to identify these additional resources that society's getting from this. Because, I've seen it, the elk in Oregon are eating up all my cattle's, forage. And people respond, well, the elk were there first. But the reality of it is the elk were in your living room first. The elk were where your HEB is first, we all give up stuff in order to have the conveniences that we have and in order to economically make money. So again, what I want to leave you all with is the reality of it is the best use of that land is not always the highest paying use of that land. And so we have to be able to identify more resources that are going to economically benefit the landowner so that they maintain the natural habitat. That's all I can say. It's tough. It's all about the economics.
Thank you very much, Kirk. Feuerbacher, the Nature Conservancy. We got some great speakers here, folks. I hope that you're getting inspired and getting some ideas and information. And the good news is there's a whole lot of people in this room that want to do the right thing, that want to help, and landowners shouldn't frown upon them when guys with this much education and background come up and speak. Now, the next person we have coming up is a doctor. He works on two-legged people, not four-legged people. We have Dr. Paul Bonnell, who's been not a pediatrician, an internist, right? Here in the Port Lavaca area, way back since 1986. He's actually very interested in air pollution and lung disease. And this is one of the questions I had. What's the prevailing incidents of disease. While they set up, just a little story, I was a weatherman in Los Angeles for 18 years. And in those 18 years, I became a little bit of a smog expert. And we had to shut down a steel mill. And of course, there was a hue and cry, you're cutting down industry and all that, yada, yada, yada. So I'm covering the story as a reporter. And just out of dumb luck, I guess, I went to San Bernardino County to the medical director and I said, how many incidents of emphysema do you have, or asthma? She said, we had 300,000 cases per year. And the steel mill was about 25 miles that way. And I'm not saying there was a direct correlation, but that's where everything was flowing. So by shutting down the steel mill, the state of California had to figure out a way, okay, we're going to move them to another location where they don't have such a negative impact on the population that had nothing to do with it. So we are all breathing what's out there. Some of it is good, some of it is bad, and some of it we don't see. So it's no big deal. So anyway, but I went to A&M to study meteorology when there was no Dixie chicken. That's what I wanted you to know there. There was 3 roads back then. But I was on top of the meteorology building my first year, and we were on the top, and the TA says, hey, go get all those little white things on top of those machines. And I said, what are we doing? We're checking for pollution. And I, like a big dummy, said, I don't see any pollution. He goes, it's from Houston, you big dummy. Right. From Houston all the way to college? Unbelievable. So it's all one planet, and we'll also have to figure out how to hold hands in this. And so Dr. Bunnell has been involved with the Baka Bay Foundation for many years, and here is his presentation. And of course, the human impact, I think, is the most important part. Yes, we care about birds. Yes, we care about fish. Yes, we care about land. But when it starts affecting little human beings, I think it's an important thing. Dr. Bunnell, thanks so much.
Sorry for the
No problem.
getting
Nope.
that,
I'm good at
to operate. Again, my name's Dr. Paul Bonnell. I'm an internal medicine physician in Port Lavaca. I've been here since 1986. Came here out of residency with my wife, and here we are a number of years later. My involvement is with Lavaca Bay Foundation, and I wanted just to mention a little bit about the Lavaca Bay Foundation. It's a very small group, and we're fairly new, so we can just go through those slides. So we're a nonprofit. Our plan was to be a source of, to visit with other organizations in the community, and at the same time to be a voice for our concerns regarding Lavaca Bay. We try to speak as an advocate for the Bay. We have monthly meetings and have had a number of great speakers, including Dr. Montagna and Leslie Hartman. And we've learned a great deal, at least I have, in terms of water inflow in the Benthic area under the mud where all those creatures live, that without them our redfish and trout and shellfish and crabs wouldn't have a chance. We've worked with the Matagorda Bay Foundation, the San Antonio Bay Partnership, and Texas Sea Grant, along with the city and Calhoun County as well. Next slide, please. Our monthly speakers have included groups from all these different organizations. Next slide. And one of our projects, for example, was we're interested in working with students. This is a group of students that went out to the Peninsula Park, and we're trying to identify where the trash along the water line is coming from, and our determination was this was not coming off the boats of recreational boaters or off of the ships coming into Matagorda Bay, but it was left there primarily by people that were down fishing at the bay. To our right, we've placed signage at the Peninsula Park. And in our next slide, please. There is now, thanks to our city and our city manager, our city engineer, Jody Weaver, and our mayor, the Peninsula Park has really become a nice resource, a nice place to relax. There's a walking trail in that area, and information regarding the bay we were able to put up along the walking trail, talking about some of its history, and about the waterway itself in terms of keeping it, taking care of it. Okay. Our current that we're working on now, at this time, again, will involve students at high school and junior high level. With the city, Port Lavaca, have come up with a plan to use a new technology of using these large filters, sock-like devices that will catch storm water following heavy rains in an effort to try and prevent trash getting into the bay. Many people don't realize that the trash we see in our street on occasion, if it ends up in the sewer, it's going to end up out of the bay. And our hope is to, through a process of putting markers on the different storm sewers in different neighborhoods, to educate the people that live there that pouring motor oil into their storm sewer, allowing sweeping trash into the storm sewer is simply going to end up out of the bay system. So that's a project that's growing, and we have some support for it financially. We're becoming more of just a part of it, but it's exciting, and hopefully we'll get students in Calhoun County interested in this type of protection of our habitat. So now, switching gears, we've been talking quite a bit about the different issues along freshwater carrying through the bay. I'd like to talk from a little bit different perspective in terms of how pollution affects the human body. This has been well worked out, and there continues to be more information on it. And I think it's important that we all become familiar with that. I would start by saying that I focus on cardiovascular disease and lung disease, and I'll try not to be too wordy. In looking in 2019, again, cardiovascular disease continues to be the #1 cause of death in the United States. In 2019, the number of deaths due to cardiovascular disease in the United States was 957,000. The World Health Organization also did a study. It was a 3-year study, and the results were released also in 2019 and indicated that worldwide the death rate from cardiovascular disease was 18.6 million. So this is a big problem. If we go back to the mid-1950s, the knowledge that we have about cardiovascular disease and the risk factors on one side of the scale has reduced the risk of cardiovascular disease. And those risk factors would include things that you're very familiar with: smoking, diabetes, obesity, sedentary lifestyle. We've learned a lot about lipids. When I was in medical school, we didn't talk about lipids. Now it is a major intervention that has benefits that go far beyond the cardiovascular system. So I'd like to go forward with just a few examples here. If we talk about air pollution itself, I'll go back one, please. If we go to that upper slide with air pollution, our big factors are going to be nitrous oxides, volatile organic compounds, sulfur oxides, and also ozone. Ozone is a particularly important contaminant because, or polluting factor, is because ozone absorbs lots of heat. And when we think about warming our climate and rising temperature within our climate, a lot of this is because of man-made substances which are in the atmosphere and that absorb a great deal of energy from the sun and heat the ambient air that we live in. Can we go to, okay, we're on the next slide. The toxic metals that are a problem. Lead, it was not until too long ago it was felt that lead at a concentration of 40 micrograms per deciliter, underneath that people were safe. We now know that levels should be more like 2.71 milliliters, and that higher levels are associated with cardiovascular disease by injury to our blood vessels. Mercury, arsenic, cadmium, all of these agents or heavy metals that are in oceans and waterways. At this time, if we look at mercury, mercury itself, the highest means of getting that into our system is through the fish we eat. Mercury is released by the burning of coal. Mercury is in coal and it goes up into the environment, then we have rains, and the runoff ends up into to our water systems, and then ends up in the, and this would be up in that left-hand
Do
column.
any of our fish have that problem around here? Do we need to be concerned about our fish?
Yes,
Okay. Tell them.
yes, we do. It's a food chain, problem in terms of the smaller fish, not so much a problem, but with eating fish, say, for example, redfish and speckled trout that are in environments where there is a lot of mercury in the foods on which they survive. It concentrates. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and if we move down to the climate change there on the left, of course, we know the problem with forest fires. I would also make a little mention there, this little abbreviation at the bottom of PM 2.5, and that's referring to particulate matter. Scientists divide particulate matter into three categories. One being fairly large, the particulate matter 2.5 microns is smaller, and as a result is kept in the atmosphere. Ozone would be actually a gas